Okay, so I think I see also what your point might be. So important of positive relationships according to social psychology, and I guess the assignment also wants me to illustrate how behavior affects the relationships and propose a possible strategy for addressing the behavior. So if we just look at the addiction of social media, I think one thing that we could talk about is how does social media affect our social behavior? Like how does that affect how we interact with everything else? So if we're showing signs and if it's an addiction to social media, then that just means that we're doing it all the time. We feel a pull to do it. When we're not able to do it, we feel a type of withdrawal or discontent because maybe even we've created a physical homeostasis around it. So I guess the way that we could look at this is if we start to look at the social medias, how does that affect us socially? So especially the way social media is nowadays, um, you're not really even sure what information is true and what's not. So I'll just give a couple examples because I know I could give a million. But we've seen people treat Chinese Americans in a certain way that isn't inspiring at all. And it could be because of a lot of what they're hearing in different avenues of social media. And if the mind is attached to that, then it's always thinking about it. So the person goes from watching the social media because if they're attached to it, they're doing it all the time. And then when they're not doing it, they're thinking about doing it. They have a desire to do it. That's just like a drug, even if it's a psychological addiction and not, the physical addiction of like heroin or something like that. But so how does that start to affect, real personal relationships? The social media and what they hear and then what they think and then they build this belief that can, the treating the Chinese Americans in that way, that's a result of all of that imbalance and all of that thinking and everything like that. Or 100 likes where it makes somebody feel better about themselves, so that's the way that they're interacting on social media, looking for a certain type of feedback. And I've noticed that when we really do this type of activity of attachment to social media, attachment to media in general, and we're doing that all the time, we are fundamentally not paying attention to the world around us. So we're fundamentally not paying attention to our five senses, which means that we're less compassionate, we're less caring to the actual people around us. There was a time where I was on social media a lot, where I played video games a lot and things like that. And it created one type of network, but it created a disconnection almost between a completely other type of network, which was the network of connection in my physical life, like the people around me, the light of the day around me. Days would go by and I wouldn't even know what day it was because I'm just so lost in this activity because my mind is addicted. And even when I'm not doing the activity, I'm thinking about the activity. And so the way that that affects, how I interact with everybody socially is affected, if that makes sense. So what do we do? Well, just to keep it simple, I noticed the more that I would pay attention to media and the more I would feed that addiction, the less I was connected to my sensory perception. The less I was paying attention to what I was looking at, the less I paid attention to sounds, the feeling of my own body. I would eat food and I would eat it so fast I didn't take any time to taste it or enjoy it. I would drink a cup of coffee, but I wouldn't smell it and enjoy the aroma. I wasn't present. I wasn't mindful, which means that I was labeling and judging the world around me. And I had no point of attention in the moment that was deliberate. So one of the ways that I personally was able to come away from these attachments and addictions, I don't know if I ever got to the point of like full blown addiction. Uh, I don't suffer too much, or I never really have, but maybe a little bit to phones and things like that. You get addicted to your device in your pocket. When you don't have it, you feel that's how you gauge the addiction, is when the stimuli isn't there. How do you feel? And I would get all nervous. Oh, my phone, what do I do? Also, maybe there was a little of attachment and addiction there too. So, but instead of declaring war on it, instead of throwing my phone away, and you know, I did try that. I tried stuff like that, and I could feel that force, and it just wasn't, didn't feel right. Instead, I would engage my senses more. So rather than engaging the media stimuli, I would engage the world around me, even to the point where when I would play a video game, or I do look at the news or something like that, I'm still engaging my five senses. I'm still paying attention to the light or the air or the sounds or my body and the world around me. So I didn't declare war on media. Instead, I connected to the world around me more. And how does that affect my social relationships? It really is, if we're going to use the word positive in the Freudian psychology of we seek what is more pleasurable, and we want to kind of reject or push away what is not pleasurable. That basic dynamic which most life forms conform to some extent. You know, I want to feel good, so we're going to say that that's positive. Well, connecting to my life as it's happening is far more positive. There's more feedback from that. Paying attention to my breath, paying attention to my body, paying attention to the light of day. I can interact with people better. You know, I communicate a whole lot better. I hear people a whole lot more when they're talking to me. Since I'm not just thinking my own judgment thoughts, sometimes I see things from another person's perspective. And I don't fully know what it's like to be them, but I have a baseline of something to go off of, you know, a basis of comparison, compassion, empathy. These things are all possible because I'm not just locked. My light of awareness isn't just locked in on a media or on a thought about the media. Instead, and I can still engage media now, and it's not an addiction, it's not a source of a trigger or anything like that. I can still, if I want to watch the news, I just engage the world around me while watching the news. And if it starts to feel like it's pulling me towards repetitive, habitual, and unconscious streams of thought that are ultimately unproductive, I go back to the world around me. I go back to my body. I go back to my breath. I go back to my posture. I go back to the sounds of the world. I go back to how everything feels, and I feel the world with my sensory perception. So instead of declaring war, I engage. And that's a potential strategy if somebody has an addiction or, you know, an unhealthy imbalance towards social media and towards things like that.